The Master Series. We're going to have Rodney Miller interviewed here today, and it looks like we're going to hear some great music too. Trying to speak up here. Meet the Masters is a series of artist interviews in front of a live audience. The interviews are conducted by our festival intern, David Misal, right here. He's a great guy. An American Studies doctoral student at Penn State Harrisburg. The Meet the Masters program is intended to give audiences the opportunity to learn about the lives and music of celebrated folk masters like Rodney here. Today's guest is Rodney Miller of the Stringrays, and these are the Stringrays. Let's hear it for him, everybody.
There we are, thank you.
There you go, Dave.
Hey everybody, I'm David and I'll be conducting this interview. And I just want to take a second to introduce you to Stuart here, who's playing the bass for us, and Owen playing the guitar, also part of the Stringrays. I don't want to waste a whole lot of time because frankly, you're not here to hear me talk. If you want to hear me talk, register for classes at Penn State. I teach them, come and see me there. But today we're here to talk to Rodney Miller, who is one of our great masters, who really has something to tell us about folk music and really just what this music means to us in our culture. So I'm going to start off with just a few quick questions and such. Basically, just kind of asking, Rodney, tell us a little bit about how you got started, where you're coming from, and why this music is something that you do, because you're a good guy. I've talked to you before. There's a lot of things that you could have done with your life. How did you end up playing fiddle, man?
Can everybody hear okay when I speak into the mic? Short and simple, I come from a musical background family. My mom grew up playing piano. She grew up in Bluemont, West Virginia, and entertained guests at the house until her father died. That would be my maternal grandfather died when she was 9. And it was back in the Depression days, and she went to, was given up by her mother and sent to a Masonic home to be raised by the Masons in Utica, New York. And they put her through Syracuse University on a music scholarship, and she made her life playing piano. So I come from that, and both of my grandfathers, I mentioned her father, played the violin and had violins. Although I didn't hear either one of them play, I inherited my father's violin, and that's what I learned on at age 7 when I started playing. And it was very family directed. And on the piano, my mother's piano was an Irish fiddle tune collection called Allen's Irish Melodies or something like that. And I was simply fascinated by these groups of notes at that age of being so short but having something to say. And I would sit with her playing piano and we'd run through some tunes. But they also were very folk-oriented as a family, and we went to what were known as fiddlers' picnics in upstate New York at the time, and that's where I gained a lot of my basic repertoire. And I was just thinking, it occurred to me that one of the tunes I first learned to play was the Golden Slippers, and that's part of the standard Fiddlers Association repertoire of tunes. And curiously enough, when I lived in New Hampshire for decades, and I was playing for Ralph Page, the grand contradance caller that brought contradance forward through the 40s and 50s and 60s. And Duke Miller, who was from the Schenectady area of New York, but he would come over to Fitzwilliam and run square dances there, and we would play for him. And Golden Slippers came up as a singing call that we used to play at the dance. And that's something that goes way back for me too. So it's like I was prepping all my life to play for dancing, in a way. So.
Well, that's actually something that kind of leads into the next sort of question that I wanted to ask you a little bit about, was your geography and your repertoire, And I mean, you could pick either one to start with, but With the repertoire, it's always interesting to kind of say, how did you develop this repertoire of music that you play that everybody's here to hear you talk about? And when I talk about geography, we all know the violin, right? We all know the fiddle, but the fiddle and the violin have so many different ways of being played and ways of being expressed depending where you're coming from. So whichever one you want to start with is a perfectly fine way to go, and then we'll take the second part of it afterwards.
Do you want me to talk about fiddle versus violin, or?
Start there. Just, what is it that makes your fiddle playing yours versus someone who might have learned to play the fiddle in Louisiana?
So, having come from the northeast of the states, my background, even within my family history, is Northern European, Irish. There's some Irish, English, a lot of English, Welsh, and German. And being in the Northeast, it's sort of a melting pot of immigrant cultures, so Irish in Boston, Scottish as well. French Canadian come down from Quebec. I used to work in the mills in New Hampshire, and I met a number of those worker fiddlers back when I was a lot younger and in New Hampshire, and picked up some tunes from them. To choose to play fiddle music kind of as a career, which I ended up combining with a career in violin making, so I could supplement my income, because there's a lot of travel involved in playing music. But I worked for a violin shop in Amherst, Mass. for 25 years, making violins and violas and cellos, as well as traveling most weekends to play music. So what I've kind of come into is my own style of playing, specifically for dances, but also for listening too. But it's a very rhythmical fiddle style and a very strong use of bowing rhythm and pressure on the bow with my right hand, as well as a lot of ornaments on the left hand, which is an indication of a more northern style, whether it be tied to Irish or Nova Scotian or whatever the melting pot is. So to get to play music for contra dances, which I've done most of my life now, contra dance is a version of square dancing, or it came over with the English. It was popular in France in the 1700s, 1600s, and it got passed along to the colonies early on and continued through that whole history of America. It never really died out in New Hampshire in particular. So I feel lucky to be rooted in that tradition and trained with the old-time callers as they were dying out in the 70s. So what I play is a melting pot. I play Irish, I play old-time, Southern, you name it, I'll play it for dances, and to provide different moods and rhythms for the dancers as part of the contra dance repertoire. That's why you get hired, to make dancing fun and pleasurable. So I'm not particularly rooted in any particular subcategory of fiddle, but in general, I just play in my own style different tunes that really speak to me and the community. So.
Very cool. So you're talking about contra dance here, and with the three of you on stage, I have a unique opportunity here that I don't always get with everybody. Y'all want to give us a minute or two of something? When I think contra dance, I'm not sure exactly what I'm hearing. Y'all want to give me a minute or so of just what we're thinking about here, for those of you who don't really know what we're talking about? You okay with that? Sorry, he did not know that I was going to do this to him. Okay, just to be clear. So, sorry.
Well, to explain contra dance, so we're going to play for a contra dance with our caller, Will Mentor, sitting over here. Tonight, we'll be playing a set upstairs, so you can experience it firsthand. You probably already have. But contra means that partners end up forming couples in a long line down the hall, sort of facing each other. So a contra means against each other. And then they do figures within usually measures of 4 or 8 groups, different figures that the caller prompts. And so we play music that addresses the different kinds of dances that are being called. So within that structure, there are like movements called haze, where people are just sort of weaving back and forth in a smooth dance movement. Then there are very strong movements where there's a balance and swing, where you'll hit your foot on the floor and kick one way or the other, and then do a swing. So there's all these different figures that the music is responding to. And we try to pick music kind of fits each and every dance if we can, because that enhances the whole experience. But if we were to play, maybe we could just play a typical traditional chestnut tune, maybe like Lamplighters in A. So there's also a contra dance called Lamplighters and the tune called Lamplighters, and it's not very much played anymore just because the callers don't go there. It's part of the older repertoire. But it'll give you an idea of what the kind of bowing rhythm and phrasing is. Very strongly phrased tunes and a lot of action on the bow. So let's play.
Hey, thank you. It's always good to just kind of have that sort of sense of exactly what we're talking about and whatnot. So, one of the questions when I'm talking to people about this kind of thing is just, who are the people that when you look to your past are the major influences on the playing that you do now, on how your style developed, or on how the genre that you're part of developed, whether or not it was crucial to you. So do you want to talk about some of those sort of past masters so that we don't forget, those key figures?
Sure. Within the framework of living in New Hampshire and working with Ralph Page, I'd say there were fiddlers in the 50s and 60s. Dick Richardson, for one. Alva Batchelder lived in the area and played for Ralph Page's band. So there was that whole influence. In the town halls in New Hampshire back in the 1800s, like, is anybody familiar with Cole's 1,000 Fiddle Tune book? It's sort of a fiddler's Bible. Yeah. And a lot of those tunes were written in the 1800s. So we have Hull's Victory, Vinton's hornpipe, all the hornpipies, F and B flat tunes. And also what was happening was that there were town bands with cornets and trumpets, and they would join in playing for some of the contra dances. And there are actual written out parts for these instruments by Elias Howe from Boston, who had a lot of inventions back in the day. Elias Howe was into the fiddle music big time. So there's that whole sort of like hornpipe, like the lamplighter's hornpipe. When we came to the end of the phrase, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, bum, bum, is an indication of a hornpipe when he goes bum, bum, bum at the end, a little jump up, as opposed to a reel which doesn't necessarily jump like that, because hornpipes are more arpeggio-driven, up and down, whereas the reels kind of flow out linearly, more related to an Irish reel, say, in flowing out. So personally for me, when I was exploring all kinds of fiddling when I was growing up, there were obviously certain things that I was attracted to. And one of them, I'd say the biggest influence, was a French-Canadian fiddler named Jean Carignan, who was a taxi driver fiddler in Montreal for years and years. And I heard some recordings of his when I was a teenager, and I was like blown away. How could he possibly play tunes like that? Because it sounded as if his bow was not on the string most of the time. It was off the string, but it was so rhythmical and punctuated. So I tried to figure out how to copy that. That was one of my mentors. And I actually met him at the Celebration Northeast Festival in New Hampshire in the late 70s and talked to him briefly and told him how much I enjoyed his playing. But there have been many other fiddlers, like I've studied Michael Coleman, the Sligo fiddler that was recorded in the 1920s, and learned different things from different people. You know, you just absorb what you can.
Very good. So we were talking about sort of past masters, mentors here and such. How do you see the difference or the similarity, or how these two things work together? You know, one being trying to preserve the past, and the role of a group like this, you know, to preserve the past, but also to be open to the present and the future. Can you talk a little bit about that sort of tension?
Yeah, I don't really see it as a tension, but what I was experiencing when I was going through the contradance scene, especially with Ralph Page and Bob McQuillan, I used to do a lot of gigs with them. Yeah. And both of them were tune composers. So when I played dances, Ralph Page would always say, we have to play McQuillan's Squeeze Box for Bob McQuillan. So we had always played McQuillan's Squeeze Box. So that's a new tune written in the 1940s by Ralph Page. But then Bob McQuillan, who wrote almost 2,000 tunes, we played a lot of his tunes in the repertoire too. So it was a matter of playing the traditional music for Ralph, plus mixing in the brand new tunes that were written for dancers in the community, like Sarah Elder, who lived in Dublin, New Hampshire, and Bob wrote Sarah's jig, Sarah Elder's jig. So we used to play that. So the influence there was to play new music as well as the traditional music. And what I found really meaningful in continuing to be hired and traveling as a gigging musician in the contradance world was to adapt to the modern, and you couldn't just play the traditional like we did in the early 70s that I was playing back then, because I found out kind of that organizers are looking for sort of the new sort of move to get dancers to come and fill the halls. And if you kept playing the traditional music, you probably wouldn't get hired much as time progressed. And then callers were writing a lot of new contradances that involved both the inactive and the active couples. So then dancing became an all-active kind of dance community. And then a lot of more tunes, people are starting to write more tunes, and I am certainly a part of writing new tunes. So it creates a fresh energy, which I think is crucial to a surviving tradition. And I think, because contradances are done all over the U.S. England, it's really popular in England now. Go figure that out, because they left it behind 200 years ago. But now they're back. So it continues with this vibrant energy, and I just hope it just keeps continuing and evolving. I just hope it doesn't lose the root of it, so the feeling and the phrasing needs to kind of remain with it to be something that you call contra dance music. Anyway.
Well, I think we can all say thank God that there are people who are still doing this and who are keeping this tradition going and such. In just the last few, I was going to say, please. With just the last few moments that we have left, I always like to give the opportunity for someone who I'm interviewing to simply take the mic, take the stage, and simply tell me or talk about the thing that I forgot, the thing that they think is important. And so if there's anything that you have that that I just forgot to mention, forgot to ask or whatever, this is your opportunity to bring that out to these folks in these last few moments that we have. Or am I just that good? Joke.
Well, I'd like to thank Owen and Stuart for hanging in here. I'd like to play another couple of tunes with them before we sign off. And thank you all for coming out and listening to this and being part of a folk festival in this day and age is so important, I think. It goes way back in my roots and it feels very good. So we're going to play, let's see, how about we try Shelley and Salvation? Do that? Yeah.
And I'm going to make way for y'all so I can hear better.
So these are just two tunes that we like to play for contra dance. They're both of them are modern tunes written by fellow musicians. Paul Gitlitz wrote Flying Home to Shelley and became an air dance standard. And Salvation was written by an English fiddler, I think. Great tune, so G to A. Here we go. Thank you very much. the end of every dance, at the end there's a waltz. At the intermission there's a waltz. So maybe we could play the Bluemont Waltz. And so this is an example of a tune that I've written. I wrote it in the mid-'80s when we were traveling to Bluemont, Virginia to play for a contra dance. And I thought it was a beautiful town hall and a beautiful setting. And I just, the waltz came out right after that. And I just say it's one of my more popular tunes. It's been picked up a lot in the Irish community of players and been recorded several times. But we'll play it here, the Bluemont Waltz. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 1.